All right, so it's only been 9 days since Mark Carney was sworn in as prime minister, but in every single poll since then, Mark Carney's Liberals have the lead in the popular vote. So we're going to go ahead and look at some of those polls today, but this is quite interesting because them leading in the polls in some polls outside of the margin of error gives them possibly a majority government. Now, in the last two elections, the Liberal Party under Justin Trudeau did not get a plurality of the vote. Actually, the popular vote was won by the Conservative Party. The last time they won the popular vote was in 2015, which gave Justin Trudeau the win and the majority government. So that's looking to be a possibility, especially since we're looking at those percentages being very much the same for the Liberal Party as it was back in 2015. Now, another thing we need to talk about, and we'll talk about this at the end of the video, is the collapse of the NDP. It's an absolute collapse. It seems to be benefiting the Liberals right now, and they're in trouble. Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the party, could possibly lose his seat. So let's go ahead and take a look at the polls. And I'm just on Wikipedia for us to get a lay of the land, but we'll delve into some specific polls. But before that, I just want to invite you to my Substack. The link is down below. It is free to join. I write a lot more on my Substack than I do in, putting my videos here. You can also support the channel that way. So please become a member of my Substack today if you want to be updated on Canadian politics, Australian politics, and other world politics. Now, if we look at the polls since Mark Carney has been sworn in as prime minister, we can see that the Liberal Party is ahead in every single poll. And in the case of the Angus Reid poll, they're up 42 to 37%, which is outside of the margin of error, which is 1.5%. So that's very, very good news, especially for the Liberals, because the last two elections, the Liberals have not won the popular vote. The Conservatives did win the popular vote. So it would be important for the Liberals to win the popular vote. The last time they did was in 2015. Justin Trudeau had a majority government, and as I mentioned earlier, that was with about 39%. So the Liberals, being in this range right here is definitely good for Liberals. Now, the Conservatives are up a little bit compared to that 2015 number. Stephen Harper's Conservatives, I think we're at 31, 32%. So these 39, 35, 36 are higher. So it might not mean as many seats for the Liberals, but the NDP has dropped significantly, and we'll talk about that toward the end of this video. But let's first look at the Ipsos poll, and we can see they only had a few crosstabs, so I'm not going to go into those. I just wanted to look at the top line number, which shows the Liberals up by 4%, with the Conservatives staying at 36%. So they haven't moved, but that 4% increase has come at the expense of the NDP, now down by 2% to 10%. Now, let's just put it this way. If the NDP gets under 10% in this election, and that could be possible if they are polling this low and a lot of voters do strategic voting in order to keep the Conservatives and Poilievre out of power, that number could go under 10%. And we're talking about the worst election result for the NDP in 25 years, since the year 2000. That is a possibility. And the Green Party would be down by 2 as well, to 2%. Does that hurt the seats that they have right now? Maybe, but who knows? So let's go ahead and look at the Leger poll next. Now, let me just do the Leger data here, or the methodology they have, excuse me. You can see they have 1,568 respondents, and they did this data collection between March 14th, the day that Carney was sworn in as prime minister, and March 16th. Now, the only thing about Leger is they use an app to get a lot of their information. As you can see here, it says using Leo's online panel. So they have an app that people can connect to and answer poll questions. ActiVote in the United States does very much the same. I usually am quite skeptical of those kind of opt-in apps, especially. I think that those apps usually tend to run more toward younger voters. But that's actually a good thing, because usually the voters 55 and older in Canada are going to be supporters of the Liberal Party. Now, if we go down to where we have the overall number, we can see that the voting intentions here, the Liberal Party has gone up 5% to 42%. However, the Conservatives have also gone up by 2% to 39%. As you can see here, the NDP falls. Here they are under 10% at 9%. The Green Party actually increases. So this becomes quite interesting. Now let's go ahead and look at the provincial breakdown, because I think this is the most important. This is where we start really seeing how possibly, who knows, but possibly the landscape of Canadian politics is shifting. So, Atlantic Canada, with the Liberals being at 51%, is not a surprise. Quebec, however, we still have 40% for the Liberals. And ever since Trudeau left, and Carney has been seen as the heir apparent to Justin Trudeau, the Liberals have been doing quite well in Quebec. So that's something that's quite interesting. Another thing that's interesting as well is that the Bloc Québécois and the Conservatives are pretty much tied, 23% and 24% there. We're going to look at the Angus Reid poll. It says a little bit different, but the fact that the Bloc Québécois have fallen, and we're talking about a Leger poll, I think, a few months ago, which was showing the Bloc Québécois flirting in the high 40s, possibly rivaling their 1993 results, all of a sudden start to fall. So Carney has had a big impact. Now, there's a huge caveat when it comes to Quebec. We have to wait for the French leaders' debate. That's going to determine everything. If Carney crashes and burns in that, then it's going to hurt. And it's not going to be Poilievre that's going to have him crash and burn. It's going to be Blanchet. It's going to be the Bloc Québécois that makes him crash. So Quebec does look good right now for the Liberals. Now, if we look at Ontario, this has pretty much been tied for quite a while. We see now the Liberals have eked out a 2% lead at 44%, but still, I don't know if that's really going to change a lot of the dynamic in Ontario. Okay, we'll talk about that in a few. These next few numbers are the ones I think are quite interesting. So Manitoba and Saskatchewan, you see that at 40%. Now, an overwhelming majority of that 40% is, for the Liberal Party, is coming from Manitoba. So do they capture, I think there are 2 seats in Winnipeg that could be captured. But you see the NDP at 5%. This is horrible. This is a really bad number. So if you have someone like let's say Nikki Ashton up in the north, in the Churchill riding, if she's all of a sudden losing on election day, the NDP's in huge trouble. And also, she would be one of the candidates that would be considered a leadership candidate for the NDP if Jagmeet Singh loses his seat, which is also very, I'm not going to say very likely, but definitely a 50-50 possibility, especially with these low numbers. When we look at Alberta, we see the Liberals at 31%, which is improving quite a bit from what they had before. There's a possibility that they could maybe compete for some more Calgary seats with that number. Stay tuned. But this is the big one that really stood out to me, is the British Columbia number, with the Liberals at 46%. To show you how unusual it is for the Liberals to be that high in British Columbia, the last time the Liberals were over 40% in British Columbia was when Pierre Trudeau was the leader of the party in his first ever election in 1968. That's how long ago it was since then. So we're talking about before I was born, before probably many of you were born. That was the last time that the Liberals got over 40%. Now, Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party did, I believe, win British Columbia in 2015 with 30-some percent, 32% or something like that. But suffice to say, that would be a huge, huge number. Now, with the Leger poll, they also have other things as well. If we look at the popularity or the impressions, we see Mark Carney is much more favorable at 46% compared to 39%, but the unfavorability rating is at 28%. As you can see, Poilievre is underwater, and as Canada moves to, or really has been in more leader-based elections, this number actually matters more. And then if we look at the breakdown, and this is another thing that we'll see in the other poll especially in the other poll, that's really gonna possibly be a game changer for the Liberals is we see here the NDP. We can see that favorability, they have 40% favorability for Mark Carney compared to 19% unfavorability. And when it comes to Polyev, they do not like him at all. There could be a lot of soft NDP voters who strategically voting move to the Liberals at the last minute. That's going to be something that is possible. Now, if we go to the Angus Reid poll, this is where we're going to really see that possibility. As you can see, Conservatives crumble, Liberals surge past Conservative Party of Canada into majority territory, but Grits, which is the nickname for the Liberal Party, if you didn't know, vote commitment is softer, and that is true. So let's go ahead. As you can see in the Angus Reid poll here, it's the first time in quite a while, well, at least in this time frame that we have over a year, well, actually, this is just within a few months, that the Liberals have been ahead. So that's good. Now, they mentioned the commitment to their choice. 13% of Liberal voters, as we can see here, are not very committed to their choice. It's not that strong. So, but here's the thing, with the Liberal voters, they could really go NDP, Green, Bloc Québécois, if we're talking about Quebec, Conservative. They really can go anywhere. Now, only 10% of Conservative voters say they're not really going to move. They really don't have any other place to move but to the Liberals. They could move to the People's Party of Canada, maybe, but probably not. But to me, the bigger number is the NDP here at 21% of their voters not necessarily committed to voting for them. Now, yes, they could go for, they're more likely going to go for the Liberal Party. Some can go to the Green, but this 21% would almost be entirely, almost exclusively the benefit of the Liberal Party. Now, these are just some of the issues. They ask which prime minister would you think would be better, Carney, Pierre Poilievre, or somebody else, and Carney is winning in every single one of those. And we also see Carney doing well as far as being considered the preferred prime minister of Canada. The only group of voters that Carney is losing to Poilievre in are male voters between 35 and 54. And for those of you who watch American politics, this is also very similar. So in American politics, we've seen a lot of the Gen X men, my generation, unfortunately, going more toward the MAGA and conservative side. The same thing is happening here. But one thing that, as I mentioned, to keep in mind, those voters 55 and older, both male and female voters, are usually the strongest bedrock, at least right now, for the Liberal Party in Canada. Now, if we keep going down to other numbers here, this is the provincial breakdown, and this is where it gets really, really interesting. So let's start over at British Columbia. Now, Angus Reid does have that, it's split 40-40. Now, how this usually works is the interior of British Columbia is almost like Western Alberta. Okay, so those ridings usually go quite conservative. Along the coast, those usually go NDP, whereas the Liberals can do well in Vancouver. They could take a few seats. They could also take a few seats in the suburbs of Vancouver as well. One of those seats being Jagmeet Singh's seat, the NDP leader. That's one thing. Alberta, no surprise. Saskatchewan, as I mentioned, most of that vote in the previous one was Manitoba. So as you can see, Manitoba here, you also see a split, 40% to 41%, the Conservatives slightly ahead. But as you can see with Saskatchewan and Manitoba, it does have the NDP number higher. So if you remember the Leger poll, they said only 5% from these two provinces would vote for the NDP. This looks much higher in the 13 to 14% range. That's going to make a big difference as to whether the NDP hold the two seats they have in Winnipeg or if Nikki Ashton holds her seat in the North. Now, this is where it gets really, really interesting. The Angus Reid poll shows the Liberals winning Ontario 47% to 41%. If this comes to fruition, Mark Carney has a majority government. Game, set, match. That's it. Mark Carney has a majority government. This number is quite different than what we've seen in other polls. So to see the Liberals up by this much in Ontario is an outlier, but this means that a lot of NDP seats could go to the Liberals. This also means that a lot of the seats from just outside GTA going down to Hamilton, maybe going over to Milton, Kitchener, stuff like that, maybe some of those are more vulnerable. Going out east, Oshawa and so on, maybe those are more vulnerable. Who knows? But this number is high, almost at 50%. So I am going to caution it is an outlier, but it is interesting nonetheless. Now, if we look at Quebec here, we can see that the Bloc Québécois in this poll is doing substantially better, with the Conservatives a distant third. But Mark Carney's Liberals are still at 39%. Remember, they're at 40% in the Leger poll. So the Liberal number stays the same. Almost all of the seats, except for like 2, maybe 3 seats on Island Montreal, are held by the Liberals. These numbers would keep those seats as well. And then as we look at Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland and Labrador, we basically see the numbers that are favorable for the Liberals. Now, I want to go down to this part because this talks about where those seats are. So as you can see, we're looking at metropolitan areas now, and we're looking at federal vote intention decided and leaning voters change from early December of 2024. We look at the Metro Vancouver area, the Liberals have gained 15%. That's huge at plucking some of those seats. Now, I don't think that might include Jagmeet Singh's seat, but as you can see, the NDP has dropped by 9. If we look at Calgary, we see the Liberal Party up 28%, competing with the Conservatives. Could that change some seats in Calgary? Maybe. Who knows? Those are going to be close ones. Winnipeg, you see the NDP down 14% and the Liberal Party up 21 points to 47%. Now we had the Toronto area. We had the 416, which is really in the city of Toronto. They're at 57%, but that's even up 30%. And the 905, that's essentially getting outside of Toronto, just in and around Toronto. Even a little bit further out. I think that might include places like Hamilton, Kitchener, Oshawa, going on. I don't know if it goes as north as Barrie, but it is pretty much outside. You can see they've had a 25% increase. Montreal, they're already good on the island of Montreal, but they've now basically solidified those seats according to this poll, and Halifax as well. We see that. This one it could be the game changer. It's not necessarily an outlier, but this is kind of the first data that we've seen in regards to this. So they ask people who they voted for in 2021 and who they intend to vote for in 2025. Most of the Conservative Party voters are staying, right? But 12% are saying they're going to the Liberals. Most of the Liberal Party, 84%, are also saying they're staying. So the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party are dead even. But 8% of Liberals say they're going over to Conservatives. So here's the thing. 12% of Conservatives going over to Liberal is bigger than 8% of Liberal going over to Conservatives. That doesn't help. If we have a status quo election, it still benefits the Liberals because Alberta's like skyrocketing numbers, and to some extent Saskatchewan skyrocketing numbers, really tilts the popular vote in the favor of the Conservatives. Now, let's go ahead and look at those who voted NDP in the last election. We have 47% of NDP voters defecting to the Liberals. That's huge. That's huge. Only 39% are staying home. Okay, so the NDP has totally lost a huge chunk of their voters. They're only at 39%, not even at 40%. Only 9% are going to the Conservatives. Those are probably more out west than some of those seats that I mentioned, possibly along the coast of British Columbia and whatnot. And even with the Bloc Québécois, nearly a quarter of Bloc Québécois voters are going to go over to the Liberals. So this means that that the Liberals have pretty much solidified the island of Montreal. It's up toward Quebec City. Let's see how that works for the Liberals. But overall, these polls look really, really good for the Liberal Party and possibly a majority government. All right, so we're done looking at the polls. As you can see, the Liberals are pretty much in the driver's seat right now. Of course, this is Canadian politics. Anything can change at any moment. Ask Justin Trudeau. He wasn't necessarily expected to be the prime minister in 2015. He ended up with a majority government. So that is a possibility. But let's look at the NDP, because the NDP is on the verge of collapse. Now, they've had bad election results, or not great election results, I should say, the last two elections. And there had been calls for Jagmeet Singh to no longer be the leader of the party, but the party resisted, and he has remained on as the leader. So the question then becomes, where does the NDP go from here? Because there is a likelihood, and maybe even a good likelihood, that Jagmeet Singh loses his seat. And another problem is that a lot of people, as I mentioned, Nikki Ashton and others, could lose their seats as well. People who would be considered maybe next in line to be the NDP leader. You have people like Charlie Angus, who is not running for re-election. So there's another possible leader of the NDP who's not going to be there. You do have some like Peter Julian, who maybe could be the leader after this collapse. But the question becomes, does this collapse become so huge that even people like Peter Julian actually get swallowed up? This is a big possibility, and this is where, when we look at 2015, we knew that the NDP were in trouble because people who shouldn't have been losing, right? Like Jack Harris, Peter Stauffer, definitely one who was known as a man of the people. He knew his constituents. He lost. When he ended up losing his race, it pretty much was known that the NDP were gonna do quite poorly. Megan Leslie, who is a big name in the NDP, she lost in that election as well. So if the party ends up performing this bad, now remember, in that election where a lot of popular MPs for the NDP lost, they won 19% of the vote, like 19.3%. We're talking about a possible 10% decrease from that. And that can swallow up a lot of the leadership in the NDP. There's a possibility that the NDP will have to do an extreme overhaul. Now, maybe this won't be the case if we look at the election in Ontario, the provincial one that we had just a few weeks ago. The NDP did suffer when it came to popular vote, but they were able to hold on to a number of their seats to still remain the official opposition. So there is a silver lining, but that silver lining is a very, very, very thin. All right, well, that's all I wanted to talk about today. Thank you all for joining me. Make sure to go to my Substack and subscribe there. Help out the channel. Subscribing is free, but you can also be a paid member, get articles early, and be able to comment in members-only articles. So thank you all very much. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.